All right, guys, let's do a little art class. Some of you wanted more 2D tutorials, so that's what we're going to do in this one. US letter, landscape it, content, 2 layers, white background, 100% as a raster. That'll give us this document. And so I'm going to try to keep this somewhat fast and simple. It's definitely something I could talk about for a minute, but um, we're going to take a look at a couple brushes here. So hard round brush, soft round brush, the airbrush and basic one. We'll give you those two basically. So now, if we had a shape of some type, we went in here and started shading this thing. A lot of times, what we're actually doing when we're creating images in 2D, there, and what we're trying to do, anyways, is while we're creating our images, we're trying to control edges that are sharp, edges that are soft, trying to control gradients. Okay. Very, very important that we understand this. And gradients aren't what you think they are. So let me start with this idea here. If we had dots really close to each other like this, make it a little bit smaller. We do dots. Make it smaller and we do more dots. This is known as stippling. And stippling is a type of brushwork. Brushwork is an art fundamental, but this kind of pattern, not just dots in this arrangement, but this idea of using different types of line weights, line weight being like thin line weight, thick line weight, right? Well, we can think of these circles as line weights, maybe. Um, but how they start to work out from thick to thin and they become a little bit more spaced from each other, perhaps. You think of this as another type of a gradient. Okay. So if we were doing a field and it had a road coming out and maybe some background mountains or something, if we were doing grass in this area, the grass here would be just like the indications of grass towards the horizon. And as you start to work it forward, you might start turning them into little clumps. You're going to play around with the line weight, the white space, which is the spacing. You're going to try to create an interesting arrangement, little grass shapes, and start to make them more or less kind of turn into a gradient towards that background where they become very faint, but also you don't do too many of them. You don't overdo it because you don't need much near the horizon to sell the illusion of a grass back there, right? Just a couple little pieces, even. And as they come forward, you start to do maybe larger clumps, start to make them more detailed, and you start to mess around with that empty space a little bit, that white space, and you play around with the composition too. So ultimately, this is what ends up happening a lot of times when you're working with just like line art, ink, do stuff like this, right? Really peculiar kind of way of working with it, but as you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. You might even erase a little bit, get things going just right. You can add a little bit of filler in there with like some small pieces, perhaps. But as it comes forward more and more, you might make your brush a little bit bigger. You might actually start adding a little bit of detail, some of these pieces of grass, and you probably will work into the base a little bit more to create some shadows. Maybe break those up a little bit nicer. That's more or less what we end up doing. And after you get so close to the camera, certain point, you'll end up doing individual blades of grass, rendering them out appropriately with the detail if they got really close, obviously, right? So that's the main idea. And once again, this is another type of gradient. The same idea as stippling there, left, right? But it's just that you're now going to be using little shapes instead of dots, right? So once you understand this, things become a little bit easier when you're creating these art pieces. But the hard round brush is kind of critical to all this. You got to understand how to work with it. And you could literally do this with a mouse. But if you were to shade with a hard round brush with no pressure sensitivity for anything, you would end up having to pick all your different levels of gray here. And if you pick these fine enough, you can actually create a smooth transition. Unfortunately, it's not very reasonable and Probably not something to do, but you don't do that, right? Now, if we turn the opacity down, use pure black. There's another way of working with this where we just this do a whole fill with opacity turned down. That's transparency, right? So transparent paint. Now, in acrylic painting, you can use clear medium with a little bit of black in it. You get the same thing. You paint it this, and then you let it dry, and that's going to be known as a layer. And then you start painting again on top of it because it's clear paint with some black pigment in the emulsion there or whatever. It'll suspend the particles in it, of course, and it'll dry on the canvas. But every time you do a new layer, you let it dry and you do a new layer, all those pigments start to combine together basically, and this is what you end up getting, right? So this is what happens traditionally. It sort of happens here digitally as well. Now the only difference is in digital, guessed it, it never dries. You can always blend and mix and blur this stuff, smudge it together. So we'll get to that in a second. But the main thing I wanted to point out here is that you can do this. Now, if you use lower opacity, you'll get a finer gradient. But here's the cool thing. If we color sample, we hold control. Instead of picking grays over here, we can hold control and pick a gray. We can do a couple strokes between these after picking. We can sample again and do it again. We can keep doing this until we get a really fine gradient. Now, it won't ever be perfect necessarily unless you really take your time to do it. Nobody's got time for all that, but you can see it's starting to work out a little bit, right? Maybe I got a little bit of lightning effect in the wrong area, but you get the idea. You can work this way if you need to. Now, this is where it gets fun, right? Because we use a hard round brush with pressure sensitive opacity. Basically, this works the exact same way as a hard round brush with opacity set on it, right? Full strength. And if we do a little shading like this, where we start to push heavier and heavier as we go down, we can get the shading going, but it's still banded, right? So now we can sample and do the same thing. But if we push lighter, we get lighter opacity or less opacity. So we can control that with the pen, basically. So it's a little bit easier to do in some respect. However, just still so. But here's the trick. If we turn the opacity down with this one, it limits the maximum opacity. So no matter how hard I push here, I only go halfway basically on the opacity. As a result of that, when we use it with low pressure, we're actually down there like near the 1 and 2% maybe with this as we push very lightly, or it'll feel like the low end of this pressure curve anyways becomes a little bit more manageable. You can actually get decent blends out of this relatively fast by doing this technique, and it works out quite well. Okay. Still not perfect though. And you would think, well, maybe soft round brush, right? Now, the soft round brush is pressure sensitive opacity, but it's a soft brush. Okay. So we do the same thing. Maybe we start light, start working it a little bit darker, a little bit darker. It has a different pressure curve, so it kind of jumps off here towards the end. But same process. You sample and you mix, and you sample and you mix. The only difference with this one is that because it is soft round, these transitions between the different levels of gray here, they don't look nearly as bad, right? They're still there, but they're a little bit harder to see, and we can actually blend fairly well with this. But they're still there at the end of the day. We'd have to take our time to really work them together. So a little bit challenging, perhaps even with the soft round brush, even if we lowered the opacity with it, which, by the way, will give you some fairly clean results, but still going to have a little bit of a stepping kind of effect to it, right? But obviously, you can see we're getting better and better by doing this. So the other strategy, of course, is what I started with here, where you do the shape first, and then you go through with the soft round brush, and you use it very large, usually, and you can just kind of lightly dust it, if you would. And that's going to create some really soft transitions that way. Okay. Now they're not perfect transitions because at the end of the day, the soft round brush here, what it does do is it creates, it still has spacing. All brushes are controlled by spacing for the most part. And because of that reason, can't really tell what's going on in here with this one maybe, but there's these little notches in here taking place everywhere. And that's because of the brush, doing dot, dot, dot really finely. You get these little weird patterns in here. That's something you can expect with that strategy or that technique, anyways. Right. So, but that's going to be probably one of the better ways of working with just blending or mixing with your brush only, and like just using your brush to get things done. The other strategy is that you accept the fact that this is going to occur and you make it part of your art style, or you can use a Blender Blur brush, which is down here towards the bottom. In Krita, it's called Blender Blur. It looks like a Q-tip. And this is actually a really cool tool because if you use it, full strength, it tends to smudge. It's actually a smudge brush. But if we use it lower strength, it can be used to very subtly blend things or smudge them or blur them. But still smudging technically, but if we use it very lightly, you can see we can do something a little bit rough, and then we can go back and make it a little bit softer perhaps. Okay? So these are a few ideas on how you can actually work with the brushes like that. Even this one you could smudge a little. Be fun. Another idea here for you, maybe you do a shape and you use the gradient tool. Gradient tool here at the top left, of course, you got different options. You can set up your own and add one or edit one. This one is black to transparent. So we can do things like this. You see the opacity's down on it? Okay, let's delete it again, try again. Right. So you can do gradients this way as well if needed. So that's always an effective way. And of course you can do this with like radial, for example. Do radial, you get this. Maybe you want to reverse it, you can do that. That maybe. And but you can also do like bilinear. You're doing like horizon lines, sometimes that's useful. Or other various scenarios you might run into. But this is the main idea of creating shading, right? With the different brushes. So when you start doing an art piece later on, there's a good odd chance, maybe we use like this pencil and we start sketching something. So we just start sketching out our shapes, our forms of whatever it is we're trying to create. And we can start working out some kind of thing here. Try to make it look cool. And what we want to do is make sure we get our proper kind of perspectives and forms. That way we can shade it appropriately and it'll look correct. But the main idea is that we can, in fact, start doing stuff like this in order to get things going. Anyways, we can just sketch a noodle for like going. You're going to eventually want to render this thing up, right? You're going to want to add all the shading and color and textures and all that fun stuff, right? So I'm going to keep it very loose right now. A lot of times when I'm doing renders, I end up, or doing any kind of concept piece for that matter, I end up doing them very loose like this. And then I just go straight to render. But I do have to make sure it's right first before I continue any further, basically. So I don't know about this thing. I don't know. But nonetheless, we got it going. And so there's a couple options here, like different diverging strategies. You can do a fill directly behind this and start working. Or some guys like to take this and maybe do a new layer. They might do a little line art. Right? So line art, they go through and they do like the solid black lines. So you drop the opacity here and you line it all out. Now, one of the things I do want to mention real quick is a lot of people have a stigma about line art and using brush smoothing. And so I want to make a little example here. Okay. So if you had a graphics tablet or a pen or a pencil and you were using this, your hand placement, of course, is on tool. And then your brush stroke takes effect at the tip and it's very responsive, generally speaking, because the center of axis is something like this. But if you were using, like you're painting and you're using something like a liner brush, something like this. And so your hand placement would still be on the brush and the tip where it takes effect is way back here. This is what's going to give you some nice, clean, smooth, curvy lines. Well, that center axis is like right here. So it's not really responsive right away because you have a little bit of a delay. And this is kind of cool because this is how, when you use like stabilizer here in Krita, at least, you'll see that it creates like a little delay behind the brush stroke. And so it's kind of like lazy mouse. You could think of that type of a brush in traditional art as being like a lazy mouse for traditional artists. Kind of fun. You'll want to turn on in preferences or configuring Krita here. You want to turn on maybe like small circles so you can tell where you're at compared to where it is. Nice. Turn delay and finish line off. I don't find that useful, but you can adjust how much it smooths, how delayed it is with that sample count. So I would recommend using actually stabilizer when doing line arts. And so you can always use V while using the brush to use a line tool. But you can also now just use stabilizer to get in here and start making things happen as well. Some of these we would have to adjust accordingly because I drew it wrong, but we want to go around and maybe correct some of our bad drawn decisions. Last minute, this is your last chance. Okay. Probably should fix them before you start trying to ink it. All right. But this is the main idea is that we can get things like this going. And so we wouldn't have a loose sketch anymore. We'd possibly have a sketch a little bit more like this, perhaps. Definitely render it a little bit different. Main idea. Good to go. Now, that's if you want to ink things, do it proper and slow and make it look really good. But I want to do a fill real quick. So, easiest way to do a fill, new layer, 100% opacity, hard round brush, maybe, or maybe the one we were just using. That G pen was what we were, yellow one. Okay, you can still use brush smoothing on this if you want. There's different ways of doing fills. If you do line art like this and it's all connected, you can easily fill this. Even if it's not connected, you could use like the auto color feature, which is pretty cool. But I don't use it a whole lot, but use that as well. All right. So I do that outline, I fill it with the fill bucket, grow it by one if needed, double tap it if needed, or go and touch up everything going on inside of it. You can see what's going on. We got the silhouette, right? So this one here, let's just alpha lock it. Right. So one of the things that really will help you is use an alpha lock and also clipping groups. So we're just going to get started here with a little bit of a darker gray and turn that brush smoothing off real quick. Maybe over here we do a little bit of a darker gray. Using full strength right now for the most part. This is a pressure sensitive opacity brush, but I can do a couple passes maybe and get a little bit more darkness out of it. Maybe I go a little bit lighter here at the top. And so this is the basic idea of what you'll probably end up doing. We have this, we have this trying to blend here on the side, right? And so controlling that gradient there will create a better curve possibly. So all we do is blender blur brush and we smudge with alpha lock on, no selection. So that way, because if you use selection, it'll pull transparency into this. But we can actually blend that out a little bit real quick and create a nice gradient if we wanted to. Something like that is possible now, where we can do things like this. Now, this is kind of a simplistic example, but basically, let me kind of do a free sketch here real quick in an empty space if we have any. Not apparently. We'll go right here. We'll just go really small. Usually better to try to do your shading when it's a little bit larger, but this pencil, it looks like a pencil. You use it larger, it's like kind of weird, right? It's a soft round brush, guys. Turn scatter off. It's actually a really excellent soft round brush without that scattering. So you can actually sketch and doodle with this thing. But let me just kind of do this free-handed here without the line art and all the process involved with it. But basically, I like to loose sketch things very fast and rapidly like this and kind of speed paint them. So this might help you out quite a bit when you're working on certain things. Maybe you're making like characters or whatever stuff that's a little bit more organic. If you're doing hard surface things, a lot of times you don't necessarily want to do very, very loose. You want to be a little bit more purposeful with your designs. So you might do a little bit of a tighter sketch and try to get those forms and shapes just right. But let's say this is like some kind of weird, angry swordfish beetle thing. And you can see like we got it going. And this is where things I think get really fun because we don't have any clipping groups right now. I want to go over the mini layers technique because a lot of guys mention that they use layers temporarily in their art videos or even speed painting videos. and then they say they just collapse them right back down, but they don't mention exactly what they're doing with them or how they're using them. And it's actually really critical to know that they're doing a number of different things with it, right? And that's what makes it so effective to work this way sometimes when you're speed painting and you're just doing art rapidly and kind of fast is you just start going to town with it. And if you have soft edges, you can always sharpen them up later on, perhaps, right? But you can also work with hard round brushes. You don't have to work with soft round brushes. Work with hard round. And you can get in here. You can start to color things, and I'm going to use full strength for this. So there's times that you want to be super aggressive with your artwork, and maybe there's times you want to be loose and sketchy. There's other times you want to be very, like doing lines. You might want to be very clean with it. But there's times that you want to be very aggressive, and there's times you want to be very non-aggressive. So when you're trying to do block-ins and things like that, you can be fairly aggressive, right? Like you try different main colors out, for example, or main values, and you can go to town for a bit and try that all out. Maybe give them a red cool thing. Anyways, but so with shading as well, to some degree, this is true. Like if I use like a heavy dark black in here, maybe not so great. But if I sample here and I just drop the tone a little bit, right? Not using pure black now, we can still be fairly aggressive with this with relatively strong strengths as well. And we can just get in here and start working now. Maybe we use blue and gray. And we try to figure out like what's going to work for this and what's not. We can clean it up along the way. And then we're going to use this kind of like mini layers technique idea where as we go through this and we want to refine it, we can do so. Okay. And it's not really that hard because we just keep using new layers to make adjustments. And if they're not quite right, we can go back and change things. So at a certain point here, we're going to get to this little point in a second where like we want to make really specific changes to these surfaces and lighting and shading and all that other fun stuff. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way of working. There's definitely different strategies for creating like concept art or illustrations and stuff. But what I am saying is that you can play around with this workflow and just get really comfortable with the idea of speed painting and using layers. It's actually not that bad. So, like for example, I want to add a highlight in this area. I add a layer and I use a soft round brush. And then I maybe use a little bit more yellow, bright yellow even. And I want to add it in this area, but this highlight needs to go like this and then back around and like this. And if I do it with a super small soft round brush, it doesn't look quite right, right? So I need kind of to control edges and gradients, right? That's the main thing. So I'm on a new layer, guys. I can use a large brush, come in here very lightly and start dusting it and creating those nice gradients that I want. It might not be quite the right shape. See where we're going with this? Maybe I make it even more yellow. See? You kind of dust it real quick. And then I can press E and use an eraser. And I can go in here with just the right size soft round brush. And I can go back and trim it up now. Okay. Unfortunately, the soft round brush doesn't erase very well. So you might, try to use it a little bit more aggressively. That could happen, or you could try turning the opacity down. Okay. But you can get in here, maybe use a hard round too, an eraser. You can get in here at least, start to work this, right? In this little area. We can start to create just the right kind of effect that we want. That's the key. Okay, so that's the whole point of this process. Like I kind of screwed up the back here a little bit. Maybe I color sample and I add it back in a little. You see? So now I can use a smaller or bigger brush, go back and clean it back up if I want. Cool, right? Because what's going to end up happening is like, yeah, we might knock off the top edge a little bit soft. You might want to shift this a little bit so it curves a little and it rounds towards the front or so. And then we do numbers like this all day till we get everything going just the way we want. And sometimes we got to be very careful about it, but we can do that. Okay. Then we could do another layer if we want. Let's say this was too bright. We can drop the opacity. It doesn't have to be that bright either. Let's say we use black. We're like, I really want some darkening in this area. Well, so like maybe this is the bottom side of it. Gonna darken down here and work it right back to where it was on the other side, basically. Now I can erase, press E and use the eraser. Do this. It's still maybe just too sharp edged, or it's not sharp. It's not soft enough at the bottom. You can do things like filter blur and Gaussian blur. So instead of using a smudge brush or blur brush, you can just use the filter and just blur the whole thing. Okay, it's pretty good like that, but it might need to be a little bit sharper at the top. Okay, you see, we get the ultimate control over this image now because we can do things like this. And like it looks okay, but lower opacity, maybe it looks better. You know, maybe we do that. Let's soften that top one. There you go. So that's kind of cool. And if, this is filled, which I don't think it is exactly filled right now because it was all just laid in very fast. So it's transparent paint. So it doesn't have a fill. But we could take these and control E them down maybe. And then maybe we need to do a fill on it, right? So let's do a new layer. We can do it underneath. Use white. Let's use a hard round brush. And for this, I'm just going to go around and just do the borders real quick. Do a fill all the way down there. Now it's really hard to tell what's going on here because of the white background, but basically, this is where you could run into some problems, right? Without starting with the fill first. But I did want to show it. So basically, we have these two layers. We got a fill layer. We got this layer. I'm going to just control G and group them real quick. And, and we're going to turn off this other stuff and turn off the background. So you see it's not solid all the way through. Then it didn't fill in these areas in the middle. Okay? Pretty important that we do that hard round brush, 100% opacity. We're trying to create hard edges more or less. And this is so that if you ever go to another scene, like you're going to try to use the same thing in a different picture or something, you have like a dark background, like you're switching from white to like black or something. The fill's going to keep it all working correctly. For the most part, it will. And so you'll see here, if we alpha inherit, this is a clipping group. We didn't finish the fill apparently. We're going to do that. But you can see kind of what's going on here now, though. Checker, of course, just means everything's transparent. We can change the silhouette up, some of the silhouette. Erase it, make those a little spikier maybe. Things like that anyways, right? All right, so then once that's going, the background's white. If this background's unlocked, we can unlock it, control I it to invert it. You can see where we run into a little bit of problems. So if we had a bunch of weird transparent pixels everywhere, and this potentially could cause problems, right? We have like white borders and stuff like that. So I mean, you may or may not need light borders, but ultimately a judgment call, I think, to do this. I think I'm still missing something. No, that's mostly right. So we'd work that silhouette a little bit more anyways. I was missing some bottom ones. Add 'em. Color 'em in later. Very flat little character, but basically you get the idea. You can use these tools very effectively if needed. That's what's kinda cool. You don't have to fight with your, digital artwork. It's not like we're doing traditional. You wanna use brush smoothing, you wanna use clipping groups or masks or whatever, you can do it. Fun. So, basically, we could do this in black and white, we could use gradient maps to color it and all kinds of other fun stuff. So but basically, yeah, black background's not gonna look the same as if we were doing it on a white background. We'll end up with 2 different results kinda to some degree, but we got it started, we got it up and going now. We have a clipping group, and so we can do, like, big shading elements as well. Alpha lock them or alpha inherit, should I say. So we can, like, shade the whole bottom perhaps, and then maybe we even, go back and just erase that on the very bottom. Who knows? If we do something like that, so it's kinda got, like, high contrast to it a little bit. Kinda like this, like, white going on in here. That's got a whole big Yeah, we could use soft round brush or we could use that pencil as well. Pencil is a soft round brush, so and we could turn the opacity down if we really wanted to. Makes it work a little bit nicer perhaps. And we can dust things still with this one, but you gotta use it a little bit larger. But you can see where this goes now. So soft round's always gonna give you soft transitions. That's all there is to it. No way to beat around that. It's just how it works. But it's pretty fun overall that you can still get in here and you can do this kind of work. Not like speed paint if you want or whatever. That yellow, that grayish value. Kinda wanna mix a little yellow into those too, 'cause it seems like a good idea. But the main thing is that we get in here, we can start working. If we want darker edges, we can do darker edges. If we want lighter edges, we can do lighter edges. Unfortunately, the background's so light, it doesn't help right now, but can detail all this as well. Just sketch and doodle, those soft round brushes. Really take our time here at this point because now we're just getting into the rendering process. So you wanna get your sketch mostly correct as much as you possibly can. That way, you know what you're gonna do and when and where, and it'll save you a bunch of time, basically. Lots of mistakes and errors won't form because of that. Spend your time on your sketch as much as you can, and then all you're gonna end up doing is just working this until it's complete, basically, okay? You won't have to fight with it maybe as much as I am right now, and that's good. You don't wanna fight with this any more than you have to. Get in there and start making things happen. So you can spend, a minute rendering it just to get it all pixel perfect and everything, but you don't wanna have foundational flaws when you start this, like, when you start working on a render from sketch, basically. Kind of the big problem that you'll run into usually. So, when we go through here, though, now we can just keep, using layers temporarily. We can do, clipping groups. We can do clipping groups in clipping groups. There's all kinds of fun stuff we can do now, and it's not really such a big deal. I'm gonna do, like, little bumpy type of texture in here. You see, like, maybe I just do a new layer and I alpha inherit. I just start to play around with these shapes a little bit. I can control gradients now and use you can do this all with a hard round brush and blur it together if you need to. Really could. I prefer just using soft round, but it always kinda looks soft because of that reason. Sometimes you wanna think about brush stroke technique as well. Let me just give you an example. Sometimes you start hard with a brush stroke and you go light. So hard to light. Do it, geez. Hard to light. Sometimes you do, a little bit and then hard and then a little bit light. Do that. There's another technique where you do a stroke, a shorter stroke, a shorter stroke, a shorter stroke, and a shorter stroke. That one's kind of fun. Sometimes they get a little bit messy, but you can work those out. Okay. And so it's kind of the main ones there, I think, that work the most part, the best, anyways. But sometimes you want to do like a stroke and you want to blur that one side of it. Right. Sometimes you do that. So you have different various ways you can do all your different details and what eyeball. I'd have to spend a minute to get all this rendered out to a little bit more of a higher quality result. But this is the technique, guys. Basically, you just keep working. Like, want to add some kind of shading in here, new layer, run through here. If I want to blur it and smudge it, I can do that, right? I can make that part of it. The trick is when you're working in a clipping group, what you want to do, make sure alpha clip is on all of them. So that when you hit Control E, they should merge a little bit better. Okay. Otherwise, they'll have issues. So I can merge them all down if I wanted to another layer. And then that way, we don't have 1,000 layers by the time we're done with this thing. And that is the mini layers technique. Use a layer, use it temporarily to kind of get things going till, they're getting the results they want out of it anyways. Oh, it's alpha. Okay. And so, yeah, you can go in here, you'd be like, "Yeah, I wanna make this a little darker right here, and I want this transition to be harder here, maybe softer at the base." And then you could just turn the opacity down, okay? You could do this all day, guys, where you're doing stuff like this. Not even a big deal. You can color sample still. You just work right into there. The color, let me turn that oh, make sure we're using a brush that works. Maybe work a little bit of color in there. And we just keep moving. And that's really the trick to this, because now we're free to explore shapes and forms. We can continue to add details and do little sketches and just working base. All kinds of fun things we can end up coming up with here. I don't think these lines going all the way across that eye do me any justice, or does this any justice? We're gonna do the little eye dropping forward now. If the layer's got low opacity, just do a new layer. Lock it. So we could try very lightly coming in here, maybe low opacity. Gotta work that one out a little bit. Exactly doing what I want. So if I screw this up, I'm on a layer, I can just delete it, right? I don't have to worry about destroying my whole image until I get what I want out of it at least. Do low opacity. So there's times to be aggressive, there's times to be slow, right? And when you turn that opacity down, you'll get finer and finer results, just like when we were shading to begin with, right? But you'll get smoother and smoother transitions. You may not always want that. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more aggressive. So try it up, try it down, try using larger brushes, try using smaller brushes. Do all this fun stuff. You can start adding things like bounce lighting, maybe. Maybe you do that on a new layer. This little shape here might be kind of hard to get right? And that bounce light might not be as strong as you think it's going to be. So we do a little bit of bounce light in here, perhaps. Maybe it just comes in a little bit faint, just in that one area. Drop the opacity. Maybe it's a little bit of a glossy surface. Who knows? Things like this start to add up. So we can do a new layer. A lot of times I do layers very rapidly, and then I'll go back and I'll turn on the alpha inherit on it later on. Just got to be a little bit careful with this kind of strategy or technique. You can do this a little bit wrong, and it'll mess you up pretty quick because you'll either end up with like really fuzzy images or bad forms and bad shading. Other weird things can kind of strategy, anyways. But anyways, as long as you take your time, you practice it, you'll probably really fun though, just to speed paint this way and sketch and doodle. I don't think we need that much bounce light right there. Maybe just a glint of it. Yeah, I like to just kind of go crazy for a bit with all this and take my time and blend things together. And you can see this pencil, sometimes it's not as good as you want it to be. Sometimes just a regular soft round brush, the airbrush here, it's actually maybe what you want to use. Go to town for a bit. That one feels like it's better for detailing, generally speaking, and doing like specific kind of gradients. This eye, I do not want this eye to be, looks like it was, this looks a little artificial, um, cartoony. I want to make this guy a little bit more realistic looking, a little bit at least. So eventually we can work the eyeball out. Highlight here on a new layer so I can drop the, might do a new layer on top of that. I still, however you want to do your pieces, up to you. Rim light. A lot of times I go with soft round, and sometimes I'll use hard round to do detail. But basically, we're going to go in at this point in the eye area, and most characters or animals or creatures or anything got a little bit of life to it when they have an eye. That's kind of the most important area to work doing these guys. You hear now I got to shade all that up. Good. I want to add a little bit more drop shadow in here. don't wanna get too aggressive with it, but I feel like we just need a color more than that pure black. But yeah, we do. Now it's too sharp at the top, so we can smudge blur it out maybe. Sometimes we gotta collapse things quite a bit. You see, whoops, we collapse all that, and it starts collapsing weird. That's because Alpha Inherit isn't on. We click all those on, and then we shift click back down and Control E, and you see it still messes up. Alpha Inherit, I hit the wrong one. Okay, they all have to be on for some reason. It's a bug in Krita or something maybe, but that's what it seems like. It seems like it's even sometimes then it might still occasionally not do quite right. It might mess you up a little bit. So in that case, you collapse the whole group, but you unfortunately collapse it all down. So there's no like specific fill layer anymore. Which is a little bit odd, but you definitely try these things out. See if it's working. Want? I think I'm gonna try to do this a little different. But you just do it on a layer because if I screw up, boom, I can fix it. Not even a big deal. Done. Black down here. Kind of nice, like I like it like that. Maybe we can shade this one. Let's do a new layer. Shade this one down. Okay, maybe highlight some of these little areas. Although that blue should be catching on all these highlights. I doing like rim lighting and stuff or bounce lighting on the bottom there. But anyways, I think you get the idea. Maybe do that and smudge it at the top. There you go. And we just continue, guys. So that's pretty much the whole idea of this. I got to do this whole guy here in this video, I guess, but certainly is something you could consider doing, working with these this guy here. And you would start working details very, very carefully, basically, on new layers. Very fun way of working. Anytime you got little details you want to add, like little, maybe you want to make the skin fold or something, very lightly go through there. Maybe you can turn that opacity down. They can kind of blend it a little bit better. But you have to make those specific shapes, hit those specific kind of highlights exactly where you want 'em. Times to go fast, times to go slow. This is the time you go slow. This is going to be how you control your images. That's the whole reason I wanted to do this video. I wanted to help some of you guys get better control over the rendering process. And it's really not that hard once you do it because you can see just the subtlest little things. You can take it slow. You can go as slow as you want. Nothing wrong with that. But you do want to take your time. You want to make sure you get things right and sharp enough for your project as well. That was there. Let's do a color sample. Might change the hue a little bit, but I just want to raise it a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy. You still handpick colors sometimes. You can't always sample off the canvas, but certainly try. And I still add bounce lighting back here, just shapes back. But do like a dark grayish blue, and maybe you can shade with that a little bit as well. These areas. Everything's going to be soft though with a soft round brush. That's one downside. Good news is you can go through and you can add little highlights and stuff very effectively. So one little tricks I want to talk about here that I utilize when I do this anyway is that I do it at twice the resolution that I wanted to display it at. So that way when I actually display it, it looks a little bit sharper. And I still have to go through and manually sharpen it to some degree anyways. I'm not going to leave all of this super soft. I'm going to go through and add little details and little breakups of the patterns and shapes. And when you generate texture, it's just like stippling, right? Basically the same idea. You little broken up patterns and like that grass anyway. Get through here. make all this happen. Darker than these exist. Not like that anyways. Okay. Almost looking like a shrimp of sort. Something. So yeah, basically we just keep working this, make it a little bit darker. I like to just sample this kind of stuff a lot of times. And fortunately, I'm so low opacity, it's just takes a little while to build it up. But you'll see this a lot in art videos, guys. They'll say they're just using these layers temporarily and then they're collapsing them down. This is basically what they're doing, back down to like one layer, mind you. Not even using the clipping group necessarily. Well, it might be using the clipping group to control the silhouette, but not, they're not keeping a majority of those layers. Sometimes you want to be aggressive. Like right here, I might want to do a strong stroke, fade it out. Might do a bit lighter, hit some of that in here. Still would be nice to do it on a new layer, but do this one here. Oh, back. I just want to work those ones out a little. Not, it's too straight of an edge. I really rather just break it up a little, blend it out. So blue light catching in here. But basically, we got a long ways to go before we'd finish this. It's that's just how it works for myself, anyways. I wouldn't say it's the most speedy, fast way of working. Probably definitely better ways of doing concept designs that can be a little bit quicker, perhaps. But for me, this is just a lot of fun. Take that long, and if you're doing something complex enough, it could take all day, even several days, maybe. But something like this guy, just a little quick creature or prop, probably do in a few hours. I don't see why not. Hard surface stuff, you sketch out in like an hour usually. These organic type designs, depending on how familiar you are with organic stuff, you can sketch them out really fast. You're gonna add highlights in here too, possibly. You gotta spend that time practicing all that. Probably the most annoying. Once you get used to it, you can get kinda you can only go so fast with it, but, like, you can get kinda quick with the whole layout and blocking of something, which is quite nice to be able, but you gotta stay within the lines a lot of times and understand at the end of the day, you're still creating artwork. Like, you're not this stuff doesn't happen by accident. You actually have to put in that time, energy, and effort. It doesn't do itself. That effort and go forward with it and get a new layer, do a new layer. Eventually, you can do texture, and you can pencil texture in, like, you can do it all by hand if you wanted to, just doing little dots and working it all out, basically. Do some, like, shadowed areas real quick, maybe grab a highlight and then just toss it on top of them. Creates, like, the effect of, like a little drop shadow, basically, these little bumps or whatever. You can do texture that way, perhaps. You do color variations and all kinds of other fun stuff. Probably look up, like, a picture of a swordfish. It kinda looks like a sword or a sawfish or whatever, one of them things. So, yeah, you take your time, find the value you need, the hue that you want. You would do textures, fine grain like this possibly. Now, the only way to speed up this process, right, you would probably still go with what we're doing here for a bit. The only thing you can do to speed up the texturing process, well, I mean, you could do the whole concept technically, is with photo bashing, but you still have to, go through this whole. So you might have a little bit of like bounce sliding down here somehow. Not sure how I want to lay that one in right now, but you definitely want to go through. Play around with these shapes. Get them, do your sketch as much as possible first, then take your time and render the heck out of it, doing just what I'm doing right here. Just keep going with it, right? You can definitely add photographs and use the transform to like lay it out on surfaces. I'll do another video about that kind of stuff and more photo bashing stuff. Now, I think this edge might get a little tiny highlight on it, possibly. Remember, light's exponential. It actually falls off really fast. I don't know. The whole bottom would start glowing blue. I don't think it, but I mean, maybe it does. Decided what I wanted. Too much, not too little. Maybe a little bit. So basically, when you use transparent paint, it's known as glazing in acrylic painting. That's more or less what we're doing right now. So if I use like this red, a little bit lighter, probably pull this surface out a little bit more towards the bottom. But you can see once we add texture to things, it can be a little bit harder to work those gradients back out and get that kind of form going that we want. Not saying it's impossible to do. It's just might be a little bit harder than we want it to be. Be like an ocean reflection right here. Maybe this is do that. Let's do a little blue right around. And it kind of works. Not quite the way I was expecting it. I like him. I like that soft eye effect. All right, let's just do a couple little touches here. I'm going to do a new layer. Use a hard round brush. I'm just going to start in white. Do a little pattern. I could make this look really nice and cool looking, perhaps. But usually you want your shapes kind of following the form to some degree. And I'm going to do an overlay. It's just going to burn this in. I'm going to do half, maybe something like I don't think that's working out the way I thought it was going to. That would be a little bit different now. I do it really light with normal. Kind of looks a little bit better to me. So I do like these little dots on the surface. Maybe some are bigger than others, or maybe some combined together. Maybe it's like a giraffe. A giraffe. Who knows? We can go through, do this number for a bit. You see, even just that, I mean, that's pretty low opacity still right now. It shows up clear as day, this path. Turn it down lower. I just want like the faint indication that this, and I still can't get it quite right. So I'm going to alpha lock it. Let's try like orange. Looks just like it sort of can darken some of them. Can even color some of them. Alpha lock. So there's times that you want to create shapes and then shade those independently or separately. Let's use a soft compared to everything else. So run black through here, for example, or bright oranges and some things like this. They do matter. It adds up. Do a little bit more yellow here, a little bit more. Really getting the effect I want out of it. Yeah, just faint like that. Something like that. Dark blue. Oh, not right. Blue. Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, I can incandescent looking almost, but we'll go with that. The blue kind of makes sense. So basically, we can continue until we're blue in the face, continue to sharpen everything up. Because like when we zoom in at 100%, okay, kind of where we were. It's not that bad, I guess. Um, but there's a good odd chance if you ever zoom in on your artworks, it's probably gonna look kinda nasty. It's not done, enough, you know, not sharp enough and other things going on, not like the highlights where you need them or other things. Just keep working them. You gotta go down to the pixel because they're like, this is a pretty small picture, obviously. This is a piece of paper, and it's only part of the piece of paper. So it'd be much better if I made this much larger and then started rendering on it. But if you ever find a need to just kinda go through and go down to the pixel, I mean, I do, but it doesn't mean you have to. You don't always have to do this number. I think it's nice to be able to do this because then I know I can tap in a little highlight maybe on a little edge like this, right? Maybe I want a little tiny reflection right here at the edge. I can just kind of feather it in and just work, not think too hard about anything. Right? That's smaller, do that. Adding shading in there, like shadows. Eventually, we'll get to the point we're doing hard shadows. I'm like doing hard surface stuff in here. I'm not supposed to be. I erase. Oh, that's on another layer apparently. Maybe I can erase the town. This soft round brush is kind of aggressive. Thought it was softer than that. But flow, opacity, maybe linear it out or do this number. It's up to you. I like linear personally. A little bit aggressive. Set up like that. Yeah, even like right here, you see like this transition in here is pretty rough. Um, we either paint it out or we collapse things and we can smudge it out maybe. I think I'd rather just sometimes that's easier said than done, you know? Smudger because it scatters also can introduce some artifacts basically or like a little jitteriness to things. I'm not a huge fan of. Just be careful with that. Benefit of working this way though is that you're low opacity and you're very deliberately going through the whole setup. It tends to work out really well because you can always just correct things. Maybe we only darken here in the middle. We have a little high. Do things like this. Want that top to be blurrier. Fudge. Not so crazy now, is it? Right, looks pretty decent. All in a group, so we should be able to move it all together in a group still. Looks like you got a little saddle or something going on, or about to anyways. Kinda cool. So a little pro tip here, last little step. Um, Generally, when you work on something like this, it's always gonna look a little soft, look a little artificial. Add a filter layer, and this filter layer, I'm gonna do other, just do random noise. We can turn the level up if we want, turn the opacity up and down, and we just add a filter where we add some noise. Okay. And you can see what that does. Okay. Maybe a little bit strong. You can always turn this opacity down too. Or you can, it might not let you collapse it. Convert to a paint layer. It might not. Okay, it does. Sometimes converting to paint layer doesn't work. If that ever happens to you, control G it and then collapse the group, control E it. Usually that works for you. Um, but for the most part, this is kind of working the way I want, except it has noise or color in the noise. So we'll do a adjust HSV adjustment. We'll turn saturation down potentially. Ooh, that's rather interesting. I didn't know I was going to do that. I guess we could just kind of desaturate all of it a bit. That's not what I was going for. Should be able to do something to get this to work still. Usually I do it as the last step and I collapse the whole image. So that's not really not what I was going for. Let's do a fill layer, do a new layer, fill white, 100% opacity. Let's do filter, other, random noise. There you go. For this one, we can change the levels. We can turn the opacity up and down if we want to, but we don't need to now. We add it, Control Shift U it. That'll turn it black and white. Now we can do like a multiply. We can make it very low opacity. So this is another way you could possibly do. Or you could try overlay maybe. Overlay might work out pretty. There we go. Yeah, so a little bit of noise goes a long way, I think. But we'll do it with multiply, so the background blurs a little bit too. Or excuse me, gets noise. It's kinda hard to see it, not big enough, so it'd be useful. And you could do a layer underneath it. Use the airbrush real quick. And if you wanna create some kinda scene or something for them, maybe you do colored scene and maybe more cyan because that bounce lighting. So you could start doing the whole scene now. This is how you more or less do digital paintings now. Kind of gray, I guess. Something really desaturated blues like he's a deep sea. Do the cyan behind. Yeah, so I'd probably have to work that background a little bit to get it just right. Like we'd have to just very carefully get the right saturation back. Make it all look correct anyways. So what we'll do is we'll just do a little bit desaturated blues and kind of mix it up, maybe make it a little cloud. Vignetting around them or something. That'll be the thumbnail for the image anyways, or for the video out here. Like I should just do dark or really makes them stand out too, right? Give them a little bit of like a drop shadow. Right, so we could definitely keep working him. Obviously, he's not here done. Big group at this point. You can always, as a last minute touch, you can do another layer on top. You could try shading like big chunks like this. You can try doing big highlights. Well, a lot of times you got to keep them separate. The big highlight and the big shadow or whatever. In our case, I'm gonna overlay it. It was already pretty high contrast, but that even makes it higher contrast. We probably don't need that. We'll make the eye glow a little bit by erasing it. There you have it, right? Basically, not much to look at, but an okay speed paint action for you guys. If you were curious about how I do this kind of stuff, well, here you got the full treatment on this. Wasn't planning on it was supposed to be a quick video, and here I get carried away. See, I told you I get carried away. Happens. Still not sure what I'm doing with this. He needs more to him. He's a little head of a shrimp or something. I don't know. Kind of not much going on there for this guy. But work. And that will do pretty much that right there. One thing I might do at the very, very end, I'll do this with a filter layer. We'll enhance and just do a sharpen. Okay. You see, it's going to sharpen like so. So this is like a last ditch effort to save a cloudy piece, but you can see it works pretty well. I personally like it, but sometimes it's a little too intense. You might just use like halfway. Okay? That way it's not full strength. But now you get to this point, and yep, basically go around, keep touching it up, work those soft edges until they're sharper, and you got every little highlight going exactly the way you want. And if you downsample it, because remember this is 100%. If I was displaying this at half size at 50, you would not see any of that softness. So really up to you, but you can have a lot of fun. All right. I'll see you in the next one.